How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Shebeen. It's Sunday night. I'm Barry Chandler. You're very welcome. Hope you've got a drop of something nice in your glass, preferably a drop of something Irish. Some brown water from Ireland would be preferable as we head into an evening of stories and sips and hang out with your fellow community members to talk about Irish whiskey. We're going to talk about Terroir. We're going to talk about Whiskey Awards. We're going to talk about Malt. We're going to talk about upcoming events and all things Irish whiskey. So get comfortable, pour yourself something decent in your glass. Let us know what you're drinking. I look forward to spending the next 8, 9, maybe 10 hours with you chatting about the good stuff. It's Sunday night. It's not the same this week compared to the last 2 weeks. I'm on my own here at Stories and Sips tonight. Last week we had Paul Costello and Lauren McMullen filling the airwaves and the room with their banter and their songs and their cocktails and their whiskey drinking. The week before, Paul Costello was also here, as was Roisin Barry singing and she brought her guitar with her. We had a great old session. So 2 great sessions there. And we will have some more guests coming in the future again to join us on the Shebeen. But tonight it's just me. So luckily you're not paying for this or you'd want your money back. But we're going to talk about all things Irish whiskey tonight. If it's your first time joining the Shebeen, you're very welcome. A Shebeen is an Irish bit of culture, really. It's a cultural icon. It's an illicit, illegal, sometimes mostly unspoken about drinking den that shouldn't exist. There's no license. There's no approval granted for the gathering of persons to consume alcohol or for the trade of alcohol. But a Shebeen, everybody in Ireland knows where their local Shebeen is. When the pubs close or when they don't want to pay pub prices, people go to the Shebeen. So that's what we have here. It's an informal way of gathering, bringing our community together to talk about whatever's going on. We tend to talk about Irish whiskey here. It's not very formal. You'll notice very quickly nothing has been rehearsed. There's almost no script. There's a basic outline of what we're trying to cover. But we follow the banter, we follow the crack. And this event, this live stream stemmed from a series of live streams that we did throughout COVID, throughout lockdown, starting in March, 2021. And we went for 63 weeks in a row, hosting a live stream every Friday night called the Lock-In, which would go on for 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes. And it's a wonder I survived it all. But the Shebeen is a bit of a pared down, bit of a more civilized affair. There's not 4-hour sessions, I don't think. Although we always say that when we start, it's going to be an hour, it's going to be an hour and a half. And then 5 hours later, we're singing songs and swinging from the lamppost. But and in any case, this is where we gather every week, talk about Irish whiskey releases, talk about what's going on. I maybe answer some questions that have popped up in our Facebook community over the course of the previous week. And we address any topics of interest that excite us, that interest us over on the night. So tonight we're talking about Terroir, we're talking about Malt, we're talking about Whiskey Awards, and we're going to talk about what else are we going to talk about? Well, we'll see how we go. Let us know what's in your glass. I'll let you know what's in my glass. I am continuing the search for the next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club whiskey. So I'm working my way through about 5 different samples at the moment of malt, single malt whiskey samples from Ecklinville Distillery, Dunville's samples. I've got 5 different samples that we're narrowed down to. And right now I'm drinking a 20-year-old PX finished single malt. We're not going to give away any cask numbers. We're going to just talk about, just going to hint that that's what I'm tasting at the moment. And this one is all clove rocks. It's all clove rocks are kind of a hard candy you get in Ireland, but clove notes. Very, very prominent note in this one. But I'll tell you more about that as we go through the tasting. I see lots of interesting whiskeys popping up here in the comments. Thomond Ruby Port, Brian Redden, who is his palate has expanded now. When we first met, Brian Redden was a black barrel or he was a soft whiskey drinker. Now Brian Redden can party with the best of them. drinking a high cask strength, almost 60% ABV Thomond Ruby Port. Good man. An award-winning Thomond Ruby Port, indeed. Bob Hurley is having a drop of the Napo Castle 14-year-old left over from Sunday. Very good. Or from Monday. We had our tasting. I've a little drop left over too. We had our Napo Castle whiskey tasting with Middleton blender Dave McCabe on Monday. It's been a very busy week in the world of Irish whiskey, where we tasted 12, 14, and 16-year-old, as well as the Napo 1951 and a 23-year-old sample of all port cask single malt. So that was a great tasting. The replay of that, by the way, is available on storiesandsips.com. There's Troy. Hi, Troy. Hi, Scott. We've also got our resident, we don't have guests officially. We don't have human guests in the studio, but like we've got unofficial guests that were christened by Roisin the first night she was here, and she drew a face on the potato so realistically that the camera, which has face tracking in it, started to follow the potato around instead of us. In any case, shortly the potatoes here, for those of you who are interested in potatoes, which I know are many of you. Brian just had a little chicken tikka masala over potatoes. Jameson single pot still. Jason has Jameson single pot still in the glass in central Indiana. May the spuds be with ye. So we're and keep us. Paul says, give us a song. Paul, you can't get rid of you. 2 weeks here in a row, and then you turn up in the comments as well. Is there no getting rid of you at all? Kristen's got Cliff's Palo Cortado tonight because no school this week. Excellent, excellent. Right. So listen, we're going to start off tonight with an apology. And it's an important apology because yesterday I shared in our Irish Whiskey Fans America Facebook group an announcement. I shared an announcement that, a big announcement that I was delighted to share, that now that we'd reached 10,000 members in our Facebook community, it was time for us to expand our horizons, for us to go to the next chapter of our whiskey journey. And I declared that we had signed a letter of intent to purchase a shuttered distillery on Bicky Island off the west coast of Ireland, an old distillery that came with 3 potato fields, Bicky Island and Maris Piper Distillery. And I declared we're going to bring it back to life and open it on National Potato Day, August 19th. And of course, I have to share an apology because I have been inundated with messages congratulating us on the purchase of a distillery. I've been inundated with questions. How do we get there? What's the nearest airport? So convincing was this post that I got messages saying this is the most amazing thing. Can't wait to be part of it. I got of people wanting to work at this distillery. And of course, the date maybe wasn't checked by everybody who was commenting or who messaged me. And, I haven't the heart to go back into that post and say happy April Fools. But in any case, many people took it quite literally, and I apologize for getting the heart racing. But this Bicky Island, I'm afraid, doesn't exist. There's no such thing. Bicky Island, referring to my love of biscuits, maybe my love of cookies. Bicky being the nickname thrown at me at Wexford Whiskey Festival recently, and of course potatoes. Maris Piper being an Irish style of potato. Referencing all the potatoes that go in their group at the moment. In any case, that's our apology. It doesn't exist. It's not happening. But good to know that should we ever find an island off the west coast of Ireland and there be a shuttered distillery on it, there's an interest. And there are people who'll be willing to travel to it from all corners of the earth. So that's how we're going to start. Kristen says she doesn't care. She's still sending her resume. Kristen, I got the last 47 emails with the last 47 resumes. You can hold on to it for the moment. Many of you wondering why there wasn't a castle on the island, as I think that might have stretched it a bit, but I did say there was planning permission for a castle, which got some of you very excited as well. So in any case, that's our apology. Once a year, we have one chance to pull one over on you. But you took the bait. Fair play to you. I was taking the bic, says JP. The castle is still available, ask Tony. All right. Let's talk about some new whiskey releases. It's been a busy couple of weeks in the world of whiskey, from whiskey festivals, Cork Whiskey Fest. Last week when we had our Shebeen, we ended our we ended Cork Whiskey Fest last Sunday, attending it and helping out and cleaning up glasses, etc. Lauren, myself, and Paul came from Cork Whiskey Fest here to our Shebeen. And since then, what's happened since then? Oh yeah, Monday night we had our Napoke Castle whiskey tasting, which was fantastic. The largest ever, I reckon, the largest ever gathering of people drinking Napoke Castle 1951 in one place, like 70 people drinking Napoke Castle 1951, which is an extraordinary. We're very lucky. We're very, very fortunate that we've got access and got hold of those whiskies. And then Wednesday was off to London for the World Whiskey Awards, and back yesterday, and now straight into this today. There's 2 whiskey releases that kind of popped up on my radar. There may be more whiskey releases than this, and if there are, let me know in the comments. We'll talk about them. But there's certainly 2 anyway that popped up that I want to talk about. Move this bottle here. We've got empty bottles and quarter bottles coming out my ears, and I can't see the screen. All right, so let's put this up bigger on the screen for you. So new releases. We're going to start with a Redbreast single cask, which popped up this week, which is released for O'Brien's off licenses. So an off license is like a carry out, in not to be confused with the carry out off license in Ireland. But in any case, Redbreast single cask was quietly teased. It wasn't announced by anybody. It wasn't declared by O'Brien's off licenses as being available. Instead, it found its way onto social media, as these things do. 16-year-old single pot still. One single cask, 58.9% ABV and 275 euros. I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail because we got a question in our group during the week from Caroline Brannigan wondering what are these purple boxes that she sees popping up on social media that have Redbreast in them, and can she get them in America, or where could she get them in Ireland? So we have one here. We have an O'Brien's Redbreast, which I picked up today in the only O'Brien's in Cork. And we can talk about it a little bit more. I haven't opened it yet, but this is the box here. Oloroso Sherry single cask for O'Brien's wine. And these purple boxes indicate a single cask release. So here's what the single bottle looks like. A little bit closer to you there. So what these are, Caroline and everybody else who's wondering, is over the past few years, probably 3 or 4 years now at this stage, Redbreast has released a number of single casks. So in the United States, you'd be familiar with the phrase store picks more than single casks, I think. And we don't really know that phrase in Ireland so much. But a single cask release is a whiskey that's released just one single cask if it exists. It could be anywhere from 200 to 600 bottles, maybe, depending on the size of the cask, depending on how long it was matured for. Redbreast has collaborated with a number of bars, retail outlets, whiskey clubs, investment funds, a whole range of different collaborators over the past 3 or 4 years, to the point where there's now probably 30, maybe 40 single casks of Redbreast that have gone out in the market that range in age from, I think, maybe 14 years all the way up to about 30. And those are once-off releases. When they're gone, they're gone. They typically are for sale in one single outlet or one single location, or if it's a group, spread throughout the group or distributed amongst the group, as is the case with this Redbreast for O'Brien's off licenses. This is 606 bottles. 300 bottles have been distributed amongst all of their stores at the moment. 12 of them went to Cork, and maybe some of their locations only get 2 or 3 bottles, and then they're holding back another 300 for later distribution. But they've been released over the past 3 or 4 years. They typically go from anywhere from 250 euros historically all the way up to 1,200, 1,500 euros a bottle, depending on the age, depending on the location, depending on what a retailer wants to set the price at. And some people have collected them. They've collected one of every one, which would be an extraordinarily expensive pursuit. But in any case, that is what the Redbreast single casks are. Some of them cannot be bought online. You have to go physically to the location. Like Sonny Malloy's is a bar in Galway that's had 2 single casks released. You may be able to buy some of them online, but mostly you go to the bar and you'll get whatever stock is left. The Palace Bar has had some. There has been releases for the Temple Bar, for the Whiskey Exchange in London, for the single malt shop. Who else has got single casks? I mean, there's so many of them. The Friends of Middleton Facebook group, and there's quite a few. The word is that there are no more Redbreast single casks being made available. That's a word we've been hearing for quite a while, but it's probably 20 or 30 of them were in the pipeline when they announced that. Other single casks that have come out from Middleton have been Power's single cask. So there's, I think, north of 25 or maybe even 30 single casks of Powers that have gone out there as well. So those two brands would be the most common single cask releases, Powers and Redbreast. But that whole single cask program is being phased out. To the best of my knowledge, it's quite a labor-intensive program, I'd imagine. So that's the Redbreast single cask. Paul, I haven't opened it yet. I only got it this evening. It's right there, still sealed. But I'll get to that and I'll let you know. This would be considered one of the lower priced single casks at €275. Tom there is reading a book that poutine is made with carrots. Tom, you want to put that book away? It's not going to serve you well. Le Maison de Whiskey in Paris. There's another few. Yeah. So that's that release, and I suppose if you're looking for these single casks, I know there was people who are coming on our whiskey bus in August wanting to know where they could get hold of a single cask. The reality is that by then there may not be a single cask out there at retail. So the best bet is, if you want to get hold of a single cask, is to find one on the secondary auction sites, secondary marketplaces like Irish Whiskey Auctions, for example, where you can often find one of these single casks for retail price, or sometimes you might even get a bargain, get one below retail. Others have gone up massively in price depending on maybe their taste, their profile, their rarity, etc., where they were released from. So Irish Whiskey Auctions might be your best bet. But there's some cracking, really great, actually single cask. Where you might be able to get a single cask at retail is the Middleton Distillery or the Bow Street Distillery, because they have their own release, which is actually a very good 20-year-old single cask as well. All right, that's that release. Next up is a release that kind of slipped through the radar there maybe about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and it's from Waterford Distillery. And it's interesting for a couple of reasons. This is a new approach from Waterford. So Waterford Distillery, established in 2016. We're going to talk about them a lot more in a second when we talk about this notion of terroir, which I'll explain. But they released a single malt maybe 2 weeks ago called Argo, and it is lower ABV in their typical releases. Their typical releases are 50% ABV across the board. This comes in at 47%, and it comes in about 30 to 40 euros cheaper per bottle than their traditional single farm origin releases. This is what they would call their entry-level whiskey, and it is a permanently available addition to their range. 47% ABV, 65 euros, Argo single malt, and there's some few interesting things about it. It has a small little hint of peat in it. So let me see the spiel on it. It's matured fully in a mixture of 37% first fill US oak, 19% virgin oak, 19% French oak, and 23% Vin de Naturel. It has aromas of orange peel, almonds, stewed apple, bread crust, green foliage, mixed berries, fennel, and white chocolate. Flavors of bell peppers, granola, grapefruit, smoky barbecue, banana milkshake, green apple skin. Wow, that's quite the melange of flavors. I haven't tried it yet, but I will be picking up a bottle to try it. The finish is long, warming, peppery, and dry, apparently. So that's interesting because it signals maybe a willingness from Waterford to enter the market, or ability to enter the market at a lower price point than some of their other releases, which have been typically close to three figures, 95, 99 euros or $100 or more each. But we'll talk more about that as we more about their releases as we move on to the next phase of our show tonight, when we talk about terroir. And this is coming to the United States. So there's a big push from Waterford over the next few months into the United States. You'll be hearing a lot more about Waterford. We're going to try and do a tasting with Waterford. I'm going to try and get a quarterly tasting kit put together by Waterford Distillery for our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club members, so that we can do a tasting with them and experiment and experience the different releases alongside one another, learn a little bit more about it. I really want to get people to discuss and debate this very discussed and debated brand and very discussed and debated range of whiskies, because there's a lot of information out there coming from Waterford, a lot of information being shared from people who do and don't enjoy the whiskies or their approach or anything like that. So we'll talk about Terroir as we go on from here. Jeff says the new peated Waterfords are amazing. I would agree with that. Very different. I don't know what the ppm on this is, Stacey, but it's a very low amount of peat has been added. It's not a peated single malt. It is a blend of malts, a marrying of malts that includes a peated element. Ned is a great man for tasting notes, says Paul. He is. All right. Let us talk then about Terroir, because it's a good segue into this. And we can talk at length about this. We could talk for hours, days, weeks on this. It's a topic that I'm fascinated with, and I'll explain my kind of involvement in it as well as we go. Well, I suppose we'll explain it out of the gate in terms of objectivity. Well, I first came across Waterford Distillery back in maybe when I was getting into Irish whiskey, 2016, 2017. Irish whiskey was still, it was still very, very small industry compared to even what we have today in terms of the smaller craft distilleries and offerings. Of course, you had the behemoths, the Bushmills, the Jamesons, etc. I kept hearing things about this Waterford distillery, and I was hearing conflicting reports, and I was curious. I wasn't sure whether it was something I kind of took to or not. I was hearing all of this very, admittedly at the time, kind of highfalutin, kind of fancy approach to describing vision and beliefs. And I thought, wow, okay, this is all sounds interesting, but I don't know if I get it or if I fully understand it. And I reached out to the distillery and I said, look, I don't know if I fully get it, appreciate it, like it. And the message came back from the distillery, well, would you come down and spend a day with us and we'll show you everything and you can decide after that what you think of it. And I thought, well, there's no fairer answer than that. This was 2018, I think. You can go back and look on the YouTube channel. You'll find one of my early videos, which is after a day visiting Waterford Distillery. My mind was blown. I sat down beside a river in Glenshillane Woods in Waterford, and I sat down. I put my camera on a little tripod on a table beside the river. I think I just talked for half an hour, nonstop, one take, about everything I had learned, heard, and I was trying to piece it all together, almost like a stream of consciousness. Imagine watching that and the things I put you through. But it made so much sense to me. And I left that day thinking, this, to me, is the thing I can get most excited about, this focus of theirs, which we'll talk about now in a second. And I left there thinking, right, we're going to keep a close eye on them. I'm going to watch everything that they do. I'm fascinated. I believe it. There was no skeletons in the closet. Every book was opened. Every question answered. And I really enjoyed my time with the people there, with Ned the distiller, with Neil the brewer. And it was just a great day out. Really, really enjoyed it. And I learned so much. So I put together this video. Mark Rainier, the founder of Waterford, reached out afterwards to say, you got it. Like you in that video, you got what we're doing. That's exactly what we're trying to do. You nailed it in this one video. And so I was delighted that I finally understood it. So we're going to talk about it now in a second, because I got a question about it during the week. And I also managed to spend some time with Mark Newton, the head of communications from Waterford, who I've gotten to know over the last few years, in London this week. I ran into him at the World Whiskies Awards, and we shared a whiskey together and had a good chat. In terms of objectivity, full disclosure, 2 years ago, Waterford Distillery hired me to host their podcast, the Waterford Whiskey Podcast, which we'll talk about later, on the topic of terroir. And they gave me full reign, complete editorial control on the podcast. They just said, listen, we talk about this all day long. We don't know if anybody listens, but we'd love someone who's objective to come in and ask questions of us, of other people, of whiskey drinkers, and see what they think. You can put together the podcast. You can tell us what you're learning. We're not going to edit it. We're not going to have any editorial review on it. The only thing they reviewed actually was the music. They wanted a change in the music. And that was it. After that, I was free to go. I didn't even submit the episodes to them prior to release. They went out by me every week. I shared the embed code with the team at Waterford afterwards. It was only then that they listened to it once it was live in the world. So they were listening to it at the same time that you were listening to it. So I did 2 seasons of the Waterford Whiskey podcast. I'm very proud of that podcast. I think we captured some amazing insights from amazing people all over the world about organic farming, about barley, about whiskey, about maturation, about wine, about barrels, but all kinds. And most of the amazing insights happened outside of the distillery, came from people that were far away from Waterford Distillery in places as far away as France, California, different parts of Ireland. And I'm really excited about that podcast. I'm very proud of it. And I'll talk more about that in a bit. So let's talk about Terroir. So back in 2016, Mark Rainier, pictured here, he opened officially the Waterford Distillery on the banks of the River Suir. There's been a brewery on that site since the late 1700s. He managed to find an old, disused Diageo brewery. And as you all know, a distillery is really just a brewery with a few copper pots or a tall column attached to it. So he was lucky to have so much of the necessary equipment in place. He brought stills over from Scotland, 2 copper pot stills, and started distilling right there on the banks of the River Suir. Mark is no stranger to distilling. He's no stranger to the world of whiskey. He's no stranger to the world of wine or spirits. He's a former wine buyer. He's a former wine kind of company owner. He's also the man who resurrected the famous Bruichladdich distillery on Islay, the west coast of Scotland, which produces incredible whiskies and likes of Octomore, Port Charlotte, and the Bruichladdich range. And he had a plan on Islay to try and reintroduce barley growing to Islay, to use local barley, to be able to demonstrate taste from a region. He wanted a taste of Islay, and he wanted to be able to prove that through this distillery and through his whiskies. He never got to finish that project because the distillery was acquired despite his objections. His board of management, his shareholders voted for it to be sold, acquired, and all of the shareholders, I'd imagine, took some cash off the table, and some of them went on to do other things. Mark wasn't yet finished with what he wanted to do, and he set his sights on somewhere else. He wanted to find somewhere else where he could prove out his idea that a whiskey coming from a certain place will taste different than a whiskey coming from a different place, even if you use the same ingredients. And this was unproven by him in Scotland. So he brought this idea to the southeast of Ireland, where he had heard that some of the best barley in the world grows. And that's something I'd hear a lot in the world of whiskey, is that the southeast of Ireland, Carlow, Kilkenny, Wexford, Waterford, that some of the best barley in the world is right there, some of the most flavorful. So a lot of the stars aligned. Mark had some money from his sale at Bruichladdich. He also had a lot of his investors who were willing to put some money on the table again, who had done well out of Bruichladdich sale, and they purchased this old brewery and started distilling. But their approach to distilling is where this term terroir comes in, because this entire operation is driven by a belief. That belief I mentioned about a sense of place. So Mark wanted to prove that if you had 2 farms next to each other, or 100 miles apart, or 5 miles apart, using the same barley, distilled the same way, brewed the same way, matured the same way, that they would yield different whiskies, because the elements in each place would be so different that each crop of barley would have different characteristics, different flavor profiles. This was Mark's hypothesis. And so he contracted with different farmers to grow barley. He figured out how to get that barley collected and stored separate to every other farm. Now, typically a distillery will buy in from a maltster, a malting company. A malting company will have mountains of malt. They may have sourced that malt from 100 different farmers, a dozen different farmers. That's all in the same pile. It is graded in terms of its moisture levels. And so you know that this pile of barley is all the same, let's say the same protein or same moisture level, for example. And that's where you buy your barley. Mark said, no, that's too generic. We want to separate our barley into individual bays, each bay for each farm that we grow our barley with. And so he worked with their maltster. He created this thing called the cathedral, this cathedral, barley cathedral, where all of the bays stored each farm separately. So the barley was malted stored separately, and then sent to the distillery where minimum 75 tons of barley at a time were needed for a distillation. So you had a 75-ton distillation for one farm that went through the stills, went through brewing, went through distillation, and then was put into a selection of barrels. The mixture of barrels remained the same for all farms. Stills were cleaned out, next farm went through, and each farm was done separately, one by one. And the idea being that Mark's hypothesis was that you could actually prove with the new make spirit that came out that it was fundamentally different to the new make spirit of another farm using the same barley and harvested in the same year, etc. And he was able to scientifically prove this. He had a peer-reviewed journal and study done, scientifically proven that the flavor characteristics, the flavor profiles were different from the same barley in different regions. So this idea of terroir is a French term. It's well recognized in the world of wine. It's just acknowledged. It's not even debated in France that if you have a vineyard and you have vines growing on a hillside, they're going to the wine's going to taste drastically different than wines that are growing on the flat just below that hill, even if they're within 500 feet of each other. This idea of terroir is the total environmental contribution of that place. And so in Waterford, they sum it up as the intersection of microclimate, soil, site, and plant. So the site being the place, the soil being obviously the earth, the characteristics of the earth, the minerality of the soil, the microclimate, the rain, the wind, the sun, and that site might be at a slope. It might have different topographical conditions and characteristics than another site. And then the plant being the barley. And at the intersection of all those is terroir. Now, when Mark released this and said, this is our hypothesis, of course, there were many detractors. There are still many detractors who said, that's ridiculous. The flavor comes from the barrels. Distillation is an industrial process. It kills all flavor anyway. And all kinds of debates and discussions are going on. I'm not going to go into all aspects of that. You can listen to the podcast and get the independent, objective viewpoints from everybody on that. But in any case, he brought in scientists to figure out, is this true? Are we actually distilling? Are we actually creating whiskies that are fundamentally different from one another? And so they released these what are called single farm origins. So every farm that was released had its own bottling. It could be 3, 4, maybe 5,000 bottles were released or up to 10,000 bottles were released from one farm. And they were labeled, bottled individually, and all released one by one. These were young whiskies as they were released, 3, 4, 4.5, 5 years old, single farm origin. So the beauty for the farmer is that he gets to see his name on the bottle. He gets to see the name of his farm, and he gets to try it alongside his neighbor's farm and see, does his whiskey taste any different? They're all single malts. They're all 50% ABV, 100% malted barley, double distilled, and stored in a mixture of barrels. So this idea of terroir, that the place, the barley is what gives us the flavor or gives us a different flavor than we've historically been used to, is Mark's hypothesis. And he talks a lot about how the last 50 years has seen the industrialization of distilling and of farming to the point where flavor has been removed. If the most important ingredient in whiskey is barley, Mark's hypothesis is that the most attention should be paid to the barley. In other words, we shouldn't be fertilizing with pesticides or fertilizing with artificial fertilizers and applying industrial scale pesticides to our plants. We shouldn't be rolling over the ground in 20-ton tractors. We shouldn't be compressing the soil. We should be aerating it. We should be allowing it to grow naturally. We should be practicing soil crop rotation. And all these things will affect the whiskey in time and affect the barley crop. And this has been the hypothesis from day one. So going back all the way now, 7 years, 2016, they work with about 40 farmers a year. They've expanded now from just doing single farm releases to releasing what are called cuvées, where they will marry a number of these single farms together. Now, some of the arguments that are made against this project or against this approach is that by putting the whiskey into barrels that previously contained wine, bourbon, whatever it is, that you're changing the flavor. And I don't think that's being argued. I don't think that's being debated by the distillery. The argument the distillery is making is that you're starting with a different spirit. And when you start with a different spirit, because you have different approaches to barley, different approaches to growing, and you're able to separate them out, you're able to demonstrate that if they all start in the same barrels, you're going to end up with different flavors at the end. Now, whether that matters or works for you or is something that's important to you, well, that's obviously something for you to decide, not the distillery, and only you can decide if it's a worthwhile venture. In terms of the economics of it, it's a very cost ineffective process. They are distilling low and slow. In other words, they're not filling their stills. They're not doing they're not using enzymes to speed up or catalyze their fermentations. They are doing extra long fermentations. So it's a labor intensive process that doesn't make the most of energy, which in times of energy cost increases like we are in at the moment, it's a very expensive process to work. Of late, the most recent releases have been a further expansion and expression of the beliefs that how whiskey was made historically, when there was no pesticides, no artificial fertilizers, no industrial approaches to farming or even distilling and malting, that is where flavor should be explored. The new releases are called the Arcadian Farm Origins, which I put up a few of them here on the screen. Organic, the world's first organic whiskey, the world's first biodynamic whiskey, the first ever whiskey, single malt Irish whiskey in 100 years made with Irish peat. So a peated Irish whiskey made with Irish peat. It had to be peat. The barley had to be peat malted, or had to be malted in Scotland, because there was no facility in Ireland big enough to do it at the time. So their approach is very different. It's divisive because it's flying in the face of what distilleries and brands, maybe some of them, have been telling us for a long time, which is that the flavor is it all comes from the wood, or using perhaps marketing spin on whiskeys to dress up perhaps the spirit as well. So whether this is for you or not is really up to you to decide. But terroir, in any case, is what Waterford's hanging its hat on. This idea that the very place where a plant grows is the place where flavor is generated, and that flavor will be different to the field next door. Mark uses the example of Wexford strawberries. We all know a Wexford strawberry when we taste one. Everyone in Ireland knows what a Wexford strawberry tastes like. If you taste it alongside, unfortunately, a Cork strawberry, you'll know it's different. Wexford strawberries tend to get the most sun in the sunny southeast of Ireland. They tend to have the perfect conditions for growing, which would tell us that the place is the most important. And I think we all know that in our gardens, there's certain places where the grass grows well, other places where it doesn't. A plant thrives here, a plant doesn't thrive over there. So I don't think this is a new concept, and it's what people historically just called farming or gardening. But today, terroir is the phrase Mark has used. And I think the phrase itself is quite divisive. The phrase itself is what is putting people's backs up, because we don't all like change, or we don't like to be told that how we've been doing things for 40 years is not how Mark likes to do it, or he thinks it's different, or in any case, very, very divisive. And a lot of online chatter for and against this approach. We've had Mark Rainier on our lock-in live stream going back maybe a year and a half. You can find it on our YouTube channel, really animated chat that we had for about 2 hours, which was fantastic. So it's a very, very interesting topic, and it's what I like about it is that it heroes the farmers. It puts the farmers front and center. You get to know the farmers' names. You get to know the farmers' beliefs themselves. You get to understand about their farms. And if you go to the website and you put in the code for your whiskey that you've bought, you can see every detail of that farm. You can see pictures of cross sections of the soil. You can play a sound file, a sound cloud you'll hear the bees buzzing, the birds. You'll hear the wind going through the field. You can see the every date that everything happened on that farm. You can see a picture of the farmer. You can see the color of his shoes on the day of harvesting. You can see a picture of the truck that picked up the barley. You'll see the license plate of the truck. It's all there. All the data is there, which I think is really interesting as well. So there's a big data back end that'll be amassed over time, that all of these inputs, which were tracked and recorded, generated these flavors, which are tracked and recorded. Therefore, in the future, if you're looking for a certain flavor, you might be able to make the argument that we just need X, Y, and Z input to generate 1, 2, and 3 flavor. All right, let me pause here because I've been talking about an hour. Let me have a sip of whiskey before I die of thirst. All right, I'm going back now about 3,000 comments. All right, I'll probably miss some of your comments, but stick them back in again if I don't get all your questions. Click the like button, people, says Bob. Thanks, Bob and Stacey, always flying the flag. Yeah, let me throw up an old banner here. If you're enjoying our video, give us an old like. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the subscribe button. There's more than 2,000 subscribers for our YouTube channel, which is great. Jeff says the new peated whiskies are like that. Totally different farms side by side. Yeah, 2 different farms. I have them here on my shelf behind me. I'm going to move on to a drop of Heritage Hunter variety in a second from Waterford, which we'll talk about. T. Cody said, Mark set up the distillery to have some similarity to a French winery. Yeah, so look, Mark comes from the wine world. He believes that this whiskey will appeal to wine drinkers. No different than he's just set up a rum distillery in Grenada in the Caribbean, which he believes is rum for whiskey drinkers. So he's got rum for whiskey drinkers. He's got whiskey for wine drinkers. Where the whiskey is for whiskey drinkers, we'll have to find out. Stacey says, anyone who's planted a garden can tell you terroir is real. There is a glass Waterford stopper. Yeah, so I have a bottle here of their Heritage Hunter variety. So each of their bottles has a glass stopper. So how you open it is you push the bottom of it like this, and it pops open, and there's the glass stopper. T says, all the Waterford whiskies thus far have been young. Do you know if they plan to release whiskies that are a bit more mature? Yeah, so every year the whiskey gets older, the releases get older. So there's no doubt about it. Like, it's this is a distillery that didn't source any whiskies, and this is not a paid advertisement for them. My paid engagement with them was host a podcast and be done with it. I'm actually a fan, and that's documented going back long before I did the podcast for them. But their whiskies are young, and I'm the first to say their first single farm origins, I didn't take them personally. I found them to be too minerally, and I think that maybe the intersection of the wood and the flavor, which now is going to create all kinds of questions and ahas from you guys, I think I found that the intersection of the distillate and the wood is maybe not quite there yet. It's not that. For me, I think, yeah, youth could be described as, maybe they are youthful. There's no doubt. The first releases were 3.5, 4 years of age. But as they have more mature stock, they'll release older stock. They're now releasing cuvées, and cuvées are a marrying of the various single farms together. Now, some arguments are, well, if you're separating the farms to begin with, why are you now marrying them all back together again? And the argument that comes from the distillery, which is a solid one, to me at least, is that if you start with individual building blocks that are all different because they're planted in different farms, the barley comes from different regions, you now have different building blocks for a whiskey. So later on, you can choose one whiskey that has lemon balm notes, another whiskey that's leaning more to ginger, another whiskey that's leaning more to melon. And you might decide those 3 work in this ratio together and they form a cuvée. It doesn't take away from the fact that they were single farm whiskies, or that the individual contributing components were different and unique, but rather now it gives them notes to compose their own tune later on. So yeah, they will definitely be releasing older ones. Mark says, I would think you could easily taste the differences in the new make, but after it's in the cask, it'd be hard to see the difference. It's not. And I challenge you. I would say go out and find single farm origins that were released in the same year. So you'll see on their label, it says like Ballykilcalvan 1.1, 1.1 meaning like the first release in the first year from them. And you'll find another farm, same barley, same casks, 1.1, and you'll notice the difference. It is different. Now, even if we, to our nose, might not fully detect all the differences, these whiskies have been sent off for gas spectrometry and chromatography for notes. So beyond a nosing and a sensory panel of humans, they are put through computers and sensory machines to identify the notes and the flavor profiles and to show the differences. So there's no doubt that wood is going to change the flavor, but I don't think it still takes away from the belief that you start with a different base spirit than if you had just used a generic barley, at least for my 2 cents anyway. Steve is having a seat in the snug of his pub. Good man, Steve. Matt says they're one I've always heard of but never paid much attention. Are they messing about with different strains of yeast? Currently, no. They're not currently. Now, if you want to find somebody who's a big fan of yeast, you'll want to look to for Cullen. You want to look to Powerscourt Distillery and Paul, the distiller there, who was formerly at Clonakilty, previously at Teeling. He's a big yeast fan. He's experimenting with a lot of yeasts. Killowen Distillery experimenting with yeasts. Middleton Distillery experimenting with yeasts. Richard fully agrees with the hypothesis. G. Spence, terroir is fine, but it isn't the biggest factor in flavour, which is why it is just boring now. Point proven. Now make good whiskey that represents Ireland well. Yeah, I don't think that. I think that it's a great topic to discuss. You see distilleries and brands talk about it's all about the wood, and 70% of the flavour comes from the wood. Well, if 70% of the flavour comes from the wood, you might as well just use, I mean, you could use any old grain at all, couldn't you? I mean, you could use the worst grain ever. Why do you care about the grain? And I think that there's just 100 different factors. I think that if we make the argument that barley, the flavour contribution of barley isn't important, I don't know, like, again, when you say isn't the biggest flavour contribution, if we think it's just the wood alone, then we could just, I think they've done experimentations on putting neutral grain spirit into wood and seeing if the wood improves the neutral grain spirit, and it still comes out like garbage. I mean, you need the grain, a fermentable grain, the barley, to interact with that wood in a certain way. And I'm not a scientist, but I've enjoyed the cuvées. So the cuvées and the peated releases are my favorites from Waterford. And I encourage anyone to try them and tell me whether they like them or don't like them. And I would agree that the early whiskies, like many whiskies that are released from many distilleries, young, are maybe not, our palates have been trained for an older whiskey or a more mellow whiskey, for example, whereas young whiskies can often, we're not used to them. And there's certainly a different flavor profile that come from the Waterford whiskies. I found the early ones very minerally. As they've gotten older, I found some more fruit notes developing. The cuvées, especially cherries, strawberries, raspberries. I've got Blood Brothers cuvée back here, which is one of my favorites of the cuvées. I'm interested to try the Argo. Kristen, we can't visit everywhere, unfortunately, on the whiskey bus. So we have only got 7 days, and we cannot be everywhere, unfortunately. But stay tuned for lots of exciting things in the whiskey bus. You won't be short of whiskey, I can assure you of that. Jacob wants to know, do we know if our Shortcross Club whiskey was made with Irish malt? No, it was made with Scottish malt. Irish malt didn't exist. Irish peated malt didn't exist in 2016, unfortunately. So when our whiskey was laid down in 2016, our Shortcross whiskey, there was no such thing as peated Irish malt. Nobody had released an Irish whiskey made with peated malt until Waterford. Waterford were the first to use Irish peated malt. Okay, have we got through all the comments? No, I'm still scrolling. All right, I'm almost there. Matt Beach says, gas spectrometry and chromatography, that's my language. I always envision flavor profiles as HPLC graphs with peaks of flavor. Yeah, that's exactly, Matt, what they've done. And if you go and visit the Waterford Distillery, if you're going to Ireland, book a tour, you'll be taken to the flavor lab. You'll be shown all of their new make spirits on a wall, and you'll be encouraged to take as many of them down as you want and try them side by side. You can say, listen, give me 5 whiskies from the southeast of Ireland from 2021. And they'll bring them down, all the new make spirits. You can try them alongside each other. They'll all have exactly the same brewing times, exactly the same fermenting, distilling times and approaches, exactly the same cask maturation combinations. No cask at that stage. It's just the new make spirit. That'll come later. You'll be able to try them side by side and see the difference. But yes, they then take them from the sensory panel, the human sensory panel, consisting of their terroir specialist, Angelita, their head distiller, their brewer. They then send those samples off to the United Kingdom, where they're evaluated for gas spectrometry and chromatography, and they get those charts with those peaks and those troughs of where the flavor profiles are. They're all recorded, and they have this massive library of spirits like you've never seen in your life. Imagine every distillation of every farm they've ever worked with since 2016 and samples of every single one. It's amazing. Stacey says Blackwater has also proven that the cask alone doesn't give whiskey flavor, the ingredients do. Yeah, look, I agree. Tell us, G, when you say there's so much else influencing outcome. I don't think that's being debated. I think that the argument is that you start with the best distillate, you then use the best wood, and you get a better whiskey than if you had a poor distillate and good wood, or a good distillate and poor wood, or an average distillate and average wood. So the flavor library, or the library of spirits that are new make spirits that then get put into wood. Again, like there's 100 different levers you get to push and pull to create your final whiskey. Waterford or any new distillery is limited by how many levers they have, because one of the levers that has many sub-levers is time. And over time, what you can do is you can not just have one single maturation for a long period of time, but you can have marrying, you can have recasking, you can have vatting and blending, and you can choose when to move things between barrels. And you might say, well, look, if it's all about the barrel, then why do we not just focus on that? But I think they do. And a third of the operating budget of the distillery is spent on wood, a third, which is an enormous number. So again, I think it's the distillate. The argument is, if we start with a bad distillate, we can't ever get a good whiskey. Matt says, I love the science of brewing, distilling. It's all chemistry in motion. Do we have anything else to share now? Yes. Look, my recommendation, and don't take my word for it, I didn't arrive at a conclusion at the end of the podcast or enter into the podcast or my work with them with a definitive outcome. What I went in with is, and you'll hear it in the start of every episode, 2 seasons, and it's all free on iTunes, on Spotify, on Apple Play or Google Play. You can download all the episodes. I wanted to understand, what was the hypothesis from the distillery? What do people in the field think? Farmers, whiskey drinkers, etc. And what's the outcome? And then I kind of put it to everyone. Now you've heard everything, you decide, right? Now you might listen to that, try the whiskey and go, no, I hate the whiskey. Then no problem. But I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about things that have been, I think there's a lot of misinformation. And so I think what I wanted to do was understand it all, challenge the things I heard from all sides, from the distillery, from the public, put them against one another and say, well, what do you think of this? And they'd say, okay, well, here's the answer here. What do you think of that? Okay, here's what we think on this. And it was more a conversation that ended up being, okay, so now we've learned a little bit about this, we get to make a decision. Now we've learned about this. It's like listening to farmers in California talk about the effects of climate change in Southern California on grape growing. Listening to a French wine, one of the masters of wine who owns one of the most recognized and famous vineyards in France, talking about biodynamic and organic agriculture, gave me a whole new sense of why that approach to preserving the flavor from the time it goes into the soil, long before it ever gets to the winery, and consequently with whiskey to the distillery, gave me a new sense of appreciation for taking care of that crop. Whiskey is an agricultural business. We have been maybe led to believe that over the past few years of marketing that whiskey is an industrial business, and it's copper plates and it's steel and chrome. But whiskey is an agricultural product, and I think the agriculture can get lost. And look, if in the food business we've moved towards a demand to know where our food comes from, where our ingredients come from, we're not yet there fully with spirits. We're starting to get there in wine. There's I can go to Cork, into a wine bar in Cork called Latitude, where all the wines they serve are all natural wines. And they believe that it's important to know your winemaker. It's important to know that there was no artificial ingredients added to your wine. And so I think it takes a few disruptors to come into the world of spirits and then say, and we're going to do the same for our spirit. So whether we like it or not is your decision, not mine, right? I'm not trying to sway you either way. I happen to be a fan personally of the approach, and I can be a fan and not be a fan of some of the early whiskies, be a fan of some of the later whiskies and still love the approach. And I can only imagine in 5 years and 10 years and 15 years, if they're still making whiskey, and I hope they are, that we'll be treated to flavor profiles that are not available elsewhere in the whiskey industry. And that's a wonderful thing for us, because guess what? It's not costing us any money for them to do it while they figure that out. If we want to buy the whiskey or a glass of it, ultimately it'll cost us then. But I say keep at it anyway. Spence, Brian says, listen to the podcast first and you get a lot more out of a visit. Yeah, I'd agree with that. Take a couple of hours. They're half-hour episodes. Listen to them when you're driving, and then you'll get a sense of why they're doing what they're doing, and then book a visit to the distillery, and you'll get a lot more out of it. All right, we've said enough. All right, click the like button and the subscribe button if you're enjoying the crack here. A reminder that I'm not on my own tonight. I'm joined by our resident potato, Shorty, named after our Shortcross whiskey. He's here. He's our he doesn't drink much. It doesn't cost much to keep around, so we'll keep him here. All right, let's talk about some of our Irish winners. So I was in London this week at the World Whiskies Awards, my first time ever visiting it, and a fascinating gathering of whiskey makers and blenders and marketers and bottlers and writers and fans gathering to celebrate whiskey. It was a whiskey magazine, the UK's whiskey magazine, put on these awards. And the World Whiskies Awards is the culmination of many regional awards that take place in Ireland, in Scotland, the United States, and the rest of the world. So kind of 4 main regions. And I want to talk about these winners, and I want to talk about the awards. So it's called the World Whiskies Awards. And how it's described is that in round 1, you have each whiskey that is submitted by a company is tasted in its relevant country or region and age range. So, for example, a German single malt, no age statement, or a German single malt, 13 to 20 years old, to identify and select the category winners. And then judges making up regional panels include leading journalists, specialist drinks retailers, and industry experts. And in each region, you get a gold, silver, or bronze medal awarded within each country, region, category, and age range. So in Ireland, for example, you would have best single malt in Ireland, aged 13 to 20 years, or best single pot still, aged 12 to 21 years, for example. So you get all these categories regionally. Round 2 is the category winners are tested against each other, tasted against each other to identify the best whiskey in each category. So best German single malt. So the best German single malt would have been won by somebody that was maybe best German single malt 13 to 20 years old, best German single malt 8 to 12 years. They all go up against each other, and then you get the best German single malt, right? But then round 3, which is what I was at this week, is where the best German single malt goes up against the best Irish single malt, goes up against the best American single malt to get the world's best, right? So that was what we were at this week, which was the world's best in their categories, which means that, for example, in the category of pot still whiskey, the world's best pot still whiskey, you had an Irish pot still going up against an American pot still going up against a Canadian pot still. So those 3 went head to head for world's best pot still. It doesn't mean that the one that won, which was the Canadian pot still, by the way, it doesn't mean that that beat every single pot still in the world. It means that regionally they were their own winners. Nationally, they were their own winners. And then they went up against the other nations at the final, if that makes sense. I had this conversation online during the week to kind of explain. It's a funny old system, how it works. But in any case, look, there's always people going to argue with the results of an awards show. Now, I'm going to share with you the outright winners. This is not a list of every Irish category winner. So the Irish, for example, Ecklandville Distillery, Dunville's won best Irish single malt, right, in Ireland. But they didn't end up winning anything in London. They just got reaffirmed as being the best Irish single malt, right? So they got another certificate saying, yes, you're still the best Irish single malt. We awarded you that 2 months ago, but you didn't end up winning world's best single malt, right? So I'm just going to share the world's best here, or we'll be here till Tuesday morning talking about all the gold winners as well. So the first up here, we've got Teeling, had 2 wins on the night. Lisa Jameson won Visitor Centre Manager of the Year. Great name, Jameson, to be working in the whiskey industry. So congratulations to Lisa from Teeling. And Chris Hayes won Irish Brand Ambassador of the Year. he is the European brand ambassador for Teeling. So Teeling whiskey with 2 big wins on the night, which was great. So they are the outright winners for Visitor Centre Manager of the Year, just globally. And then Irish Brand Ambassador of the Year, Chris Hayes. Now, those Irish brand ambassadors could work in any market, right? They could be a brand ambassador in America for Irish whiskey or in Scotland for Irish whiskey, but Chris Hayes is the European brand ambassador. Next up, Waterford won Best Brand Innovator of the Year, and they mentioned Terroir, which is why I bring it up tonight. And after our talk and after a question I got this week, my talk with Mark Newton at the awards. So that was great to see Waterford pick up the award. In the world of Scotch whiskey, Waterford has a lot of detractors who don't like their approach and don't believe it. And so poor Mark was sitting in the corner afraid of people shouting at him because of their approach. But in any case, they won Brand Innovator of the Year. So congratulations to Waterford. That was a big award. Interestingly, they have some categories like for the whiskey, in the whiskey industry, there are whiskey bars that might be in whiskey hotels. Hotel Manager of the Year was awarded to Eddie Langton, who is the manager of Langton's Hotel in Kilkenny. If you're on our last whiskey bus, on our day number 2, we went on the whiskey train, whiskey on the tracks down to Kilkenny from Dublin, and we went to Langton's Hotel where we had a redbreast tasting with Ger Garland. That is the hotel that Eddie Langton runs, and he won Hotel Manager of the Year. So congratulations to Eddie Langton. And Bar Group of the Year. So across all, globally, best bar group in the world is the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild. And the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild is not really a bar group, it's 10 individual bars in Kilkenny that all form part of a guild where they agree to a certain level of whiskey education. They have a certain stock of whiskies, and of course they're in the city where we can say whiskey dates back to. You'll see there at the bottom, Aquavitae 1324. Next year, Kilkenny is going to be celebrating big because it's the 700th anniversary of the first mention of Aquavitae, the forerunner to the spirit or the drink we call whiskey today, which was in 1324. So 2024, they're going to be celebrating big. So congratulations to Padraig Rafter and Cyril Briscoe and Eddie Langton and Chris Hennessy and all of the folks down there working in the bars of the Kilkenny Whiskey Guild. Whiskey Buyer of the Year goes to Ali Alpine, owner of the Celtic Whiskey Shop, owner of Celtic Whiskey Auctions, owner of the Celtic Whiskey Bar in Kilkenny, owner of Whiskey Live Dublin. Ali is a leading, not just procurer of whiskies, but really before anybody was buying whiskies, Ali was out there flying the flag for Irish whiskies, and he's a Scotsman in Dublin, no different than John Jameson was, flying the flag for Irish whiskey. So Ali won for best whiskey buyer globally, which is a huge award. And the Travel Retailer of the Year went to Air Rianta, which is the operator of the Irish airports, Dublin, Cork, and Shannon. And they have the Loop duty free and their Irish whiskey collections, which are massive selections of Irish whiskey. Some of you may have seen my videos going through the airports in Cork and Dublin of just the range. There isn't an Irish whiskey for sale in Ireland that isn't in the Loop and the Irish whiskey collections within the Loop at each of their airports. So congratulations to Air Rianta for winning Travel Retailer of the Year. And then a big award. So there's only been 82 inductees in 25 years into the Hall of Fame, the Whiskey Magazine Hall of Fame. And then this year, number 83, Bernard Walsh, owner of Walsh Whiskey, the creator of Writer's Tears, the creator of The Irishman, and the builder of the Royal Oak Distillery from 2013 to 2019 in County Carlow. Bernard accepted the award and accepted his induction into the Hall of Fame and acknowledged the very, very important and equal contribution of his wife, Rosemary, to the success of Walsh Whiskey. It's Bernard and Rosemary, really, but there can only be one inductee, and Bernard it would be the face and one of the founders of the Irish Whiskey Association, a great ambassador for Irish whiskey for the last 25 years, more. And so a huge congratulations to Bernard Walsh from the world of Irish whiskey. So and again, I didn't mention, you'll see where's mention of Irish distillers, Two Stacks Irish Whiskey, Dunvilles. None of them won awards on the night. They were the world's best awards. Instead, they were reaffirmed their award that they won regionally. So that's why we're not mentioning them here, not to take away from them, but we'd be here all night because some of the categories had 30 plus final, like best single malt had, I think there was 45 or 50 entrants, or 55 finalists, or 45 finalists into the best single malt in the world. All right. World's best single batch, though. World's best single batch single malt went to JJ Corrie. So congratulations to Louise McGuan. Massive award, massive win for the Flintlock batch number 3, which is the oldest of her I think that's the oldest, isn't it? Of her releases. There's been 3 batches. The Flintlock, and it is a marriage of single malt whiskies, mostly Bushmill stock, if I'm not mistaken, which is not declared publicly, I don't think, but they have been masterfully blended together, married together to create the Flintlock, named for the gun there that was found in the attic when she was renovating her family farm. And it's a fantastic whiskey. It's orchard fruits, spice, really is a great whiskey. And it's a fantastic win for Louise and a good recognition for all the work she's done, and a great friend to us and great friend to Stories and Sips. And some of those whiskies that are in that might have been in our own first release, The Story, going back quite a while. Brian had some of the Flintlock Friday night. Here's an interesting one. World's best flavored whiskey went to Tullamore Dew Honey. Now, this is one we don't see very often. It's pops up mostly in Eastern Europe, would you believe? Poland, Czech Republic, big fans of Tullamore Dew Honey, and the market feedback said that's what they want to drink. They want more flavored Tullamore Dew. So I don't know if anyone's ever tried this here. I tried it in the distillery. Wasn't a huge fan of it personally, but that won World's best flavored whiskey, which again, big recognition. All right, those are the awards. Congratulations to all our Irish winners. Great to see the Irish flag being flying. There was lots of Irish people in London this week to celebrate. So congratulations to everybody. And here's to more Irish wins going forward. And I think there's no doubt that as the number of distilleries increase, as the number of brands grow, we're going to see more Irish whiskies in the market. And as Bernard Walsh, the inductee into the Hall of Fame, said, look, Irish whiskey's been growing for 20 years. He said, look, I'm looking around this room. He said, it's some of the most illustrious figures in Scotch. And he said, all I can say to you is, we're coming for you. And I thought that was great. So Bernard's coming for you. We're all coming for you. All right. I had a question during the week. So actually, last Monday, we had our Napo Castle whiskey tasting. Napo Castle is a range of single malt whiskies. 12, 14, 16, and 21 years of age is the core range. And those are the single malts of Napo Castle. They are produced in a distillery on the north coast of Ireland. You can work it out. They are then... the spirit is sent to Midleton Distillery, has been for many, many years, where it is matured and married and finished further in Midleton. So it goes from new make spirit to whiskey in Midleton Distillery, and Midleton Distillery finally took ownership of the brand in 2021. This was a chance for us to talk about single malts, because we hear a lot about single pot still being this style of whiskey that many of us have grown to love, like Redbreast and Green Spots and Yellow Spots and Powers John's Lane and other distilleries, of course, producing single pot still too. But somebody who wasn't on our tasting on Monday messaged me during the week and said, what is single malt? And isn't that something that the Scots produce? And I love a good, isn't that something that the Scots do argument, because I can tell you this, for everything that the Scots have been masterfully good at telling us over the past 50 years that they do, and the reality is that the Irish did it before them. We invented the stuff. We were making malt whiskey before the Scots were. We were peating barley before the Scots were. We were doing a lot before the Scots were doing it. We were doing column distillation before the Scots were. And the last 50 years has been a marketing blitz by the Scots, who have wonderfully managed to convince the public that a single malt is first of all, they created that name, single malt, back in really the 1960s, when there was a lake of whiskey, when they couldn't get rid of whiskey in Scotland, and they they were, big blending houses in Scotland, blending grain whiskey that they made typically with wheat, with malt whiskey, and creating these big blends from many, many distilleries. But when the whiskey industry took a downturn, like in the 60s, even for the Scots, they were left with all this malt whiskey and they didn't know what to do with it. And somebody had this clever idea of calling it single malt, like it was exclusive to one single distillery, and releasing it as such. And so they managed to position their unsellable whiskey as being this sought after, exclusive reflection of quality and expression of self, that I'm a luxurious person. I'm somebody who recognizes I've got good taste. In any case, they managed to position the single malt whiskey this way. No different than the portobello mushroom. The portobello mushroom is one of the most hideous looking mushrooms you've ever seen in your life. And the neighborhood in London, Portobello, is one of the most fashionable areas. So by naming this mushroom a portobello mushroom, it suddenly became a fashionable thing and everyone wanted a portobello mushroom on their sandwich. So that's what happened with single malts. What is malt whiskey? Malt whiskey is it's very simple. It's whiskey made 100% from malted barley. That's all it is. No other ingredient whatsoever is included. 100% malted barley. Malted barley is just barley that is taken out of the fields at harvest time. It is put into a dark room into water, tricked into thinking that it's springtime, so it starts to sprout, it starts to germinate, it starts to grow. As soon as that happens, you take it out of the water, you put it into a kiln where it dries. Sometimes you dry it over a smoky fuel to get a peated malt. You'll dry it over a dry heat, a smokeless fuel to get a non-peated. The malting process is the drying of that barley, the preserving of it, because now you've exposed the starches that will be converted into sugars, which will be converted into alcohol in the next stage of the next stages of fermentation and eventually distillation. So it's simply whiskey made from 100% malted barley. That's it. That's 100% it. Single malt means single distillery, one single distillery. If ever you see malt whiskey, so on labels, which we're increasingly seeing in Ireland, you're seeing just malt whiskey, it means a vatting or a marrying of whiskies from different distilleries that were all single malts in their own right. But when you put them together, they were no longer a single malt. You could call it a double malt if you want. You call it a triple malt. Those aren't protected terms legally. But there's some great, Ireland has been making amazing single malts for the longest time. Before pot still whiskey, we were making malt whiskey. And like all of the Waterford whiskies, all they make are double distilled single malts. That's it. That's all they make. Nothing else. No pot still. Bushmills. All the Bushmills distillery makes, the only thing they make in the Bushmills distillery is single malt. That's all they make. W.D. O'Connell, great single malts. There's a 19-year-old single malt, ex-Cooley distillery. Fantastic single malt. Dingle Distillery. Now, Dingle makes single malt and single pot still. Here is Dingle single malt batch 4. One of my favorite of the Dingle releases. Killowen has released some sourced single malts. There's a 5-year-old one. And single malt can be double distilled or triple distilled in Ireland. There's no legal requirement that it has to be triple distilled. And don't let any tour guide in Scotland tell you that, or Ireland tell you otherwise. There's no rule. Brian wondering what the mystery distillery could be for Napo Castle. I wonder. Rich just poured a Napo Castle 16. Very good. Brian's pouring his Napo 1951 tonight. It is a very different drop of whiskey. And hopefully you get to watch the replay of our event, because I think having Dave McCabe, the blender at Middleton, sharing his tasting notes, he had never tasted it before. In fact, I gave him his sample. He didn't have a sample of it himself, and I gave him a sample from our bottle, and he got to share that it was nothing that he expected, and it's just really interesting to get the tasting notes from Dave. So hopefully you get to follow along with those. I'm going to pour another whiskey for myself. What'll it be? Because I have a few here. It has to be a single malt now after I talk about single malts, isn't it? What's over here? All right, we'll pour a drop of Killowen's rum and raisin. This is, which batch is this? Yeah, this is the 5-year-old rum and raisin. So this is single malt that has been finished in both Pedro Jimenez sherry casks and then dark rum. So that's what we're drinking here. All right, let me have a look at your questions. And fair play to you for all the comments here. Keep them coming. Kristen says, as a whiskey bonder, how does JJ Carey make a single malt? Does it just have to come from the same place before Louise decided how to cask it? Yeah, that's it. So if all of the so Louise will have stock from Bushmills. So if you talk about single malts, Louise will have stock from Bushmills, from Cooley Distillery, from Great Northern Distillery, and they'll all be kept separate, and obviously, and they'll be catalogued and detailed and logged as to what came from where. And then when she's making a single malt, she can create a single malt made entirely of Bushmills stock that even Bushmills themselves have never made, because she might say, all right, I'm taking a 26-year-old Bushmills X Oloroso sherry cask and I'm going to marry it together with a 13-year-old Bushmills that was ex-bourbon only, and I'm going to do it in this ratio, 64.8%, 35.2%, see how quickly I did those maths, and that becomes a 100% malt whiskey from the same distillery, single malt. So she gets to keep the title single malt. Some examples of whiskies in Ireland that are not single malts. There is the Liberator single malt. Is it the Liberator from Wayward Irish Spirits is a double malt. So from different distilleries. Is it that one? Or the Tawny Ruby Port finish, maybe? Is that the one that's a double malt? Pierce Lyons has a marriage of malt. There's also pot still whiskies that are not single pot stills. So Old Cumber from Ecklenville Distillery is not a single pot still. It is 99% Ecklenville whiskey and 1% something else, which can't be shared or disclosed, apparently. Jacob asks, does Bushmills not produce grain whiskey? They don't, Jacob. They source their grain whiskey from another distillery. And all of their output at Bushmills doesn't have a grain column. It only has copper pot stills. 10 copper pots, isn't it, Lauren? And another 10 maybe on the way. G Spence wants to know, will the liquid change? No, it won't, apparently, because the word is that, so Middleton Distillery they only make 2 styles of whiskey 99% of the time. They make pot still whiskey and they make grain whiskey. Most of what's made in Middleton is grain whiskey. And they make pot still whiskey, obviously in the copper pots, but they're at near 100% capacity at the moment with pot still and grain whiskey. Now they're building a second distillery on site. They're going to double capacity in the next 18 months. They'll then be at close, 250 million liters per annum, liters of pure alcohol a year, which is extraordinary. But they're all earmarked for pot still distillation as opposed to malt distillation. So they only make malt whiskey in the micro distillery, very small batches. They've occasionally run experiments in the main distillery, but their output, their projections for what they need from pot still whiskey ties up all the pot stills. So as of now, the contracts remain in place, and for long term, you're talking multi-year contracts for the sourcing of the single malt new make spirit from a distillery that only makes single malt new make spirit, and then sending that spirit, tankering that spirit down to Middleton, where it is then barreled and matured on site in Middleton and left to age for 20 plus years in many cases. It's a while now since I've had that Killowen. It's a real treat. Brown sugar. Oh, that brown sugar and the sweetness of think of like a rum daiquiri. Stacey affirming that the tawny port is the vatted malt. Okay. Kristen, we've already told Louise that you're very creepy and that she should stay well away from you. So sorry, it's too late now. We already told her. Lauren says there may be a few more stills we can talk about after April. I may or may not be heading up to Bushmills in 2 weeks' time. There may or may not be a big announcement coming out of the company in 2 weeks. And so I'll have more to share with you. We might even get some exclusive chance to do something exclusive video-wise when we're there as well. So stay tuned. Rich wants to know, do single grain whiskies use barley? Okay, so this is a good question. So single grain whiskey is, in Irish definition, is whiskey made in a tall column still. So not the copper pots, the onion copper pot stills, but rather the large tall columns that you'll see if you go to Kentucky or Tennessee or any bourbon distillery where they got tall copper pots or tall stills that have copper and stainless steel plates inside them. They can reach quite high. They can be 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 plates inside. Each plate is itself a distillation. And single grain whiskey in Ireland is whiskey that is made from in a column still with no more than 30% malted barley. And typically in Ireland, we use maize, or as you call it, corn, in our production of grain whiskey. Scotland tends to use wheat. There are other distilleries in Ireland using wheat instead of corn. Tullamore Distillery is using wheat. West Cork Distillery is using both corn and wheat. Middleton Distillery uses corn or maize. It comes from Bayonne in the south of France, southwest of France. One of the biggest producers of this type of corn in the world. And most single grain whiskey will have a percentage of malted barley that goes in there. And the reason that the malted barley is included, so you might have 96% corn, 4% malted barley, is that the malted barley helps with the conversion of the sugars to alcohol in your mash. So you've got a mash of your grain, and your grain being your corn or your wheat and your barley. The mash of those together going through the stills, it helps with the conversion of the sugars to alcohol. There are examples of grain whiskies that are 100% the grain and no malted barley. For example, Powers Rye is a whiskey where the mash, in other words, the recipe of the initial bunch of liquid that enters into the still, is just 100% rye. There's no malted barley in there at all. So you can do it that way. It takes longer. It's harder to do it. But typically, grain whiskies would have 0 to 9% malted barley, typically. That would be a typical thing. Normally, it's 4 to 6%. It varies by distillery. But a single grain whiskey is 90+% the grain, corn, maize, wheat, and a small percentage of malted barley. So there's 5 grains that are used in whiskey making: oats, wheat, rye, corn, and barley. And the barley then can be malted and unmalted. Those 5 grains are the ones that can be used. You can use any of them in any style of the whiskey except malted 100%, single malt, right? But you could use a pot still whiskey, could have 50% malted barley, 45% unmalted barley, 1% oats, 1% rye, 3% wheat. So pot still whiskey allows you to use up to 5% other grains other than malted and unmalted barley in Ireland. There's no provision in the Scotch Whisky file, Scotch Whisky technical legal definitions for pot still whiskey. They can't create it. They can either make grain whiskey or malt whiskey. That's it. They can't make anything else. And then those two married together give them their blends. Yeah, single grain almost always has malted barley in it, Stacey. They can't have more than 30%, but it almost never has that much. The benefit of making a single grain whiskey is a cost benefit. It allows you to make a whiskey very efficiently, low cost. It's a continuous feed of liquid into the still, continuous distillation. It doesn't have to be run in batches, and you're using an ingredient which was historically cheaper than barley. Grain was typically cheaper. Now, the prices are quite similar at the moment, but historically you could get grain, corn, maize a lot cheaper than you could get barley for. And that continuous production meant that you could distill ongoing. You didn't have to clean out the stills as much as you did with batches. You didn't have to ferment batch by batch, distill batch by batch. You just had this continuous process going. And grain whiskey is the most used style in Irish whiskey, but it's blended. So Jameson, Powers Gold label, Proper number 12, Tullamore Dew, Paddy Irish whiskey. The biggest ingredient in all of those will be grain whiskey, corn. So like you take the likes of Jameson. Jameson is north of 93% grain whiskey and south of 7% pot still whiskey. So you're drinking a grain whiskey with a bit of pot still included. And then it's just the marrying of the casks, the bourbon and the sherry casks together and aged for a certain time. Like that's what you're drinking. So grain whiskey is the most predominantly made. Kevin wants to know how come Powers Rye is still so reasonably priced. Yeah, so you probably get it for $30, $35 a bottle. It's a very cost-effective process for making. It's a continuous production. And again, you could, if you had enough rye grain, you could make this all day long. The problem with Powers Rye is that they've got so much demand for a whiskey that there isn't as much rye, the grain available for that. It's holding them back a little bit, and the demand is bigger than availability, I think. But they've increased the growth. They've been laying down more rye each year since 2016. So hopefully there'll be more available. $29 for Powers Rye in Ohio. That's amazing. All right, what are we moving on to next? Oh, yes. So we are, like, very shortly, hopefully in the next 2-3 weeks, we'll get to announce our next club whiskey once we've finalized what the club whiskey is and the economics of it and the timing of it, etc. Before we do that, we are down to our last few bottles of our Shorecross whiskey. We kept back 10 or so bottles for breakages, for missing packages, etc. And we haven't needed those 10 out of our stock. We've put them back in. So we now have, I think, what do we have? 22 bottles. 22 bottles is what we have left of Shorecross whiskey. What I'm going to do on Tuesday is I'm going to send out an email to everyone on our email list. I'm going to offer up those last 22. And whatever isn't bought next week, I'm going to buy, and I'm going to keep them for events in the future, for tasting events, for private events, for personal consumption, because I love it. So if you're interested at all in our historic Shorecross whiskey, and their feedback has been fantastic, so thank you. We've gone through almost 300 bottles, which is extraordinary. Go to storiesandsips.com. The link is there to purchase it. And when it's gone, it's gone. It's there will never again be a first peated whiskey from Northern Ireland in 75 plus years. Nor will there ever be a first peated whiskey from Shorecross whiskey ever again. Nor will there ever be a first peated whiskey from Redemin Estate ever again. So really proud of what we did with that. Thanks to David and Fiona for all of the hard work in bringing this to us. And I'm kind of secretly hoping you don't buy it, because I want to buy it and keep it and squirrel it away and tease it out over the next few years at various events or as gifts or things like that. But in any case, it's your whiskey, so go and buy it if you want it. As simple as that. Stacey's up to 8 bottles. Come on, people. Beat Stacey. She's challenging you. Richard wants to know if there's any way to read a label to find malted and unmalted barley. If it says single pot still or pot still whiskey on the label, that means it's malted and unmalted barley. The definition of a pot still whiskey is minimum of 30% malted barley, minimum of 30% unmalted barley, and up to 5% other grains. Most pot still whiskies, and again, I say most, there's exceptions to the rule, are either 50% malted barley, 50% unmalted barley, or 60-40 or 40-60. That's it. That'll be the predominant, those will be the prominent whiskies whiskey mash bills when it comes to pot still. So you'll sometimes see a description like a mash of malted and unmalted barley, but like even looking at Redbreast, it doesn't even say on Redbreast, does it? No, it doesn't say malted and unmalted barley on Redbreast with bottles, not on this one anyway. So just know that if it says pot still whiskey and it comes from Ireland, it is a mixture of malted and unmalted barley. They don't always tell you the percentages, nor are they obliged to let you know. But if you ask them, they'll often tell you, or if you Google it, you'll often find the answer as well. Tony, your question there, does Column still use malted barley? It can, yeah. We answered that one there earlier. Up to 30% malted barley can be used. Up to 30% malted barley. All right, what's next? I mentioned our Napo Castle tasting is available. The replay is available online with Dave McCabe, the blender. If you want to see a man drink Napo Castle 1951 for the first time, whose normal job is creating Redbreast whiskies, go check that out on storiesandsips.com. I really enjoyed it. And I ran into Dave in London too, and he said he really enjoyed the night and had a great time tasting the Napo whiskies. I mentioned, for those of you who are joining for the first time, I mentioned a few Whiskey Club releases. I mentioned the Whiskey Club a few times. You might wonder, what's this Whiskey Club we talk about? So Stories and Sips is our Whiskey Club. It's our Irish Whiskey Club. It is aimed at our American audience. We have members all across the United States. We release exclusive whiskies that can't be found anywhere else. We work with distilleries and brands to produce whiskies for us. We host quarterly tastings with miniature packs, gift packs of tasting kits that we send out to our members. If you want them, you just pay the shipping on them. And we also host monthly events virtually, occasionally in person as well, where we bring the makers to you. We bring the people who make the whiskies. So you're a fan of Redbreast whiskey, then let's attend an event where you can talk directly virtually to our to the makers of Redbreast. We've brought Kevin O'Gorman, the master distiller of Middleton, on. We brought Alex Thomas, master blender from Bushmills, on. We've had Brendan Carty, founder of Cologne Distillery, on. We've had really interesting guests over the last year and a half of our existence. We're only getting started. We're laying down casks of whiskey in Ireland at the same time, and we're trying to be, in my mind at least anyway, the Irish equivalent of the Scotch Malt Whisky Society, with more of a focus on community, storytelling, connection, in of course collaboration with great whiskies. So that's our goal. In time, we'll have a physical location, I'd imagine, where we can get to meet in person in Ireland. That's a pipe dream at the moment, but we're starting small, and we're releasing great whiskies. Where we've had, how many whiskies have we released? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're about to release our 6th whiskey, and that's amazing to me. Like we're so lucky to have these collaborations lined up. So we're working at the moment through samples from Ecklenville Distillery for an exclusive Dunville's release. I've already teased that we're hoping to do a release with Killowen Distillery of their own distillate. There won't be another release like that. That'll be a very unique one. And there may be a knock or two on the door recently from Two Stacks, wondering if they can come back and talk to us again and see about a potential collaboration on a really interesting cask type that they've come across that they want to know if we'd be interested in. So there's a few interesting releases over the next 3-4 months coming along the way as well. Rich's bottle of Redbreast says it was made from malted and unmalted. Yeah, so I've got different box here, maybe to you. So mine doesn't say that, but if it does, perfect. Okay, let me see. Did I get all of your questions? Mark says Dave was amazing during the Napo tasting. I thought so too. Dave's a great knowledge and a kind soul. You can't meet at Bicky Island, says Richard. That Bicky Island will be the death of me. There'll be people looking for Bicky Island for a long time. It'll be on maps. It'll turn up on maps. Eventually, we'll find a map that includes Bicky Island. Keane says he thought the Shebeen was the physical location. Look, every now and again we let somebody into the Shebeen. Sometimes we invite them back. Paul Costello was invited back 2 weeks in a row because he's a good singer. Lauren was on once. Should we invite Lauren back again? I don't know. Lauren, did you overstay your welcome at all? No, you're grand. We'll invite you back. And we'll have Roisin back again sometime as well. And maybe another guest or two. But yeah, we can't do it all. Much as we try. Johnny says the Whiskey Club's a great bargain. Cancel your cell phone if needed. The best $20 you could spend each month. Thanks, Johnny. Don't cancel your cell phone. In case of emergencies, keep the cell phone. There was another whiskey I was going to talk about real quick before we went. Oh, yeah. So I picked this up today. I'll post this in our Facebook community. By the way, if you're not part of our Facebook community, do recommend you join us there if you're on Facebook at all. Irish Whiskey Fans of America. We just crossed 10,000 members, not 2,000, 10,000 members last week. And we'll make a big announcement and a fuss about that and announce some celebration in the coming week or two. But I'll post a picture of this. So I picked this up today. Some of you saw this with my bag of potatoes beside it. Shorty approves. And Daithí O'Connell, founder of W.D. O'Connell Whiskey Merchants, who was the first man to release a peated single malt in Ireland in 50 years when he released his Bill Phil whiskey in 2018, commented underneath and he said, Barry, does that Connemara tin still tell you that it's the only peated whiskey in Ireland? And I said, Daithí, I better run and check the tin. And sure enough, unique among Irish whiskies, Connemara is the only Irish peated single malt whiskey in existence today, inspired by the 18th century art of drying malting barley over peat fires. Last time I checked, there were north of 50 peated whiskies in Ireland. Some completely peated, some with a hint of peat. But let me see if you can see it. Unique among Irish whiskies, Connemara is the only Irish peated single malt. So I'm assuming this tin was made 10 years ago. There's no date on it. But yeah, look, Connemara, there's no denying it was the only show in town, peated wise, their green box, their green tin, the non-age statement, and then this one, their black 12-year-old Connemara. They were the only peated whiskies in Ireland for many years. There's no doubt about it. They were released by John Teeling from Cooley Distillery under the Kilbeggan Distillery name, even though they came from Cooley Distillery, as a challenge to Scotch whiskey, basically saying, well, look, if peated Scotch is what's selling, then we should come out with a peated Irish whiskey to challenge or to at least take advantage of a market that's already familiar with what a peated single malt is. He made no bones about it. He said, I only produce it to sell it to people who drank peated Scotch. And it was the only show in town for a long time. But today there are north of 50 Irish whiskies that have either some peat in them or 100% peated, and long may that continue. Bob says, cancel your Sirius XM. Lauren says, I'm not getting rid of her. She's determined to come back in her dancing dress. All the lawyers uniting in the chat. Come after them. Go get them. Represent Shorecross. Richard says his is the same. But sure, look, we'll give them a pass. They probably bought a pile of tins and are working their way through them. Also, this could have been sitting on the shelf in the O'Brien's wine shop that I bought it in for 10 years. Like, there's no doubt about it. And whiskey doesn't go bad in the bottle. It doesn't go off. It doesn't get drank either, but it doesn't go off. Does it say it in the bottle as well? No. I'm a big fan of the bottle, by the way. Like, I think it's a beautiful bottle. This stands up as still one of the most beautiful bottles. I just think it's stunning. Simple, beautiful. And interestingly, like, Connemara is made with Scottish peat as well, like Scottish malt. There was no Irish malt available to it. And again, the Irish rules allow you to do that. You can use grain from anywhere. You can use malted barley from anywhere, as long as it's produced and matured on the island of Ireland. You're grand. Stacey says you don't see Connemara 12 very often. You don't. You do not. You're dead right. But I'm going to see it right now because I'm going to pour a drop of it. We're going to open it and we'll take any more chat. Whiskey Bus coming up in August. We're going to hopefully, I've been not able to spend any time on it over the last couple of weeks, but we'll be hopefully getting back in touch with those of you who are on our Whiskey Bus. We might have one place open up on the Whiskey Bus. Somebody had to pull out for family reasons. We're working through our waiting list for the Whiskey Bus. If you go to our website, storiesandsips.com, and do a search for Whiskey Bus, or just go to thewhiskeybus.com, you'll find the links to add your details if you want to be on the waiting list for our Whiskey Bus. But we think we might have one place open up. We'll be back in touch in the next week or so, or 10 days, with more information and updates on that. So our Whiskey Bus is a thing we started last year. Anthony Sheehy from Irish Whiskey Auctions and myself, and now we're into year number 2, and we're already planning or thinking about what year number 3 might look like, or Whiskey Bus number 3 might look like. So more tourism on the way, more events and more experiences that we're hoping to create, and maybe expanding our team to help that happen as well. And hopefully be nice to have some news to share on all those fronts in the coming weeks and month or two as well. Let me just find that link for the Whiskey Bus. Put in the group here. Okay, so I'm putting this here in the chat for anyone who wants to join the waiting list. So I was hoping to have a in-person meetup in New York in May, and we had secured both a location and a great whiskey brand to work with. That would have been really exciting, but sadly they had to cancel this week. We were just about to make the announcement about an event, so we can't actually. It doesn't look like we can turn around a new tasting in time. So we won't have an event in New York in May, unfortunately. It'll probably be another one, probably be September before we can do an event in New York again after the Whiskey Bus. So I think all of our efforts will be on the Whiskey Bus. Unfortunately, I was hoping to be able to do something in May in New York, but sadly, the rug was pulled out from under us unexpectedly, and the brand was very apologetic. And luckily, we hadn't taken any money for it or sold any tickets for the event. Or incurred costs yet ourselves, but we were about to. But sadly, yeah, that's not going to happen, unfortunately. Yeah, there's a lot goes into putting an event together, Bob, and thank you for saying we could do one in Boston. It's unfortunately not as simple as let's just do an event. We have to work with brands that have things in the market, and we have to make sure there's a brand that can underwrite the cost of locations and venues, has to align with my travel. And when I'm in a certain part of the US as well, and sadly, like May was the time when all that was going to come together. It can't now, but we will do others. So there'll be more in the future as well, as much as we can do anyway. But I always do add the caveat that look, the Whiskey Club, it was always intended to be a virtual club. Any in-person thing we do is a bonus. I'd love to do more. It's just there isn't just the time or the hours in the day to do it. Sadly, what with everything else we've got going on between the club and the Whiskey Bus, and trying to build out some experiences for you when you come to Ireland as well. So we'll try and do more in the future, but we're a bit out of pocket in May, unfortunately. Johnny, you can have one anytime without me. Wherever 2 or more are gathered in my name. You can do it anytime, sure. Jason's going to drive Cincinnati. Brian's going to host one. So you don't need me at all. The 2 of you can just have a drink. Just give me a call when you're there and we'll all have a chat. Whiskey Bus 3, Bicky Island, says Jason. We'll have to find a Bicky Island, all right. I might go on the search for Bicky Island. If I won't be doing events in May in New York, that'll give me a day to maybe go up the West Coast and look for Bicky Island. No, Steve, I know you're dying for merchandise and swag. I haven't the ability to pull it together. I don't. I know you're dying for stuff. I haven't. It's on the list, but that list, my God, it gets longer and longer. The quarterly tastings and the bottlings take so much time that I didn't even factor it in. From in the amount of logistics, packaging, shipping, sourcing, delays in every single thing. It is incredible, incredible. In time, we'll get all that stuff in time. Brian's going to FaceTime us in. All right, do that. I'll join a FaceTime of any meeting in Cincinnati. So Steve, we'll give you the option. Kristen says you don't have to apologize. You do enough. We're here every Sunday with you for one. I can take every Sunday night and I'll spend it working on t-shirts and hats and glassware, but there'll be no shebeen, or I can do a shebeen and no swag for the moment. So this 12-year-old single malt Connemara is a lot fruitier, lemon balmy than I remember it being. There's a very distinct maltiness, biscuitiness, bicky, but the peat is very, very light on this. It's very, very light, and it's quite fragrant. Like there's a very light smoke combining with a lemon balm, lemon zest. Do they give any tasting notes on it? There's like a hint of no tasting notes really. There's a hint of kind of like a wood oil, or like a linseed, or maybe even a little bit of varnish, which can be good or bad depending on whether you like varnish. Now the biscuity note is how do you even describe it? It's quite malty. It's quite malty, but the smoke is almost non-existent for me. Very, very little bit of smoke in it. Put Kristen in charge of the swag, says Mark. Lauren knows the swag supplier. You're all great. We put you all to work. I would like to work on swag. Like it's on the list, but I'll have to cut something else out instead. All right, so you're all meeting in Ohio. That's perfect. You can all go ahead, so and have a whiskey tasting in Ohio, and I'll zoom in, or I'll FaceTime in. I think that's have we covered everything? So look, you're great with your suggestions of swag suppliers. It's nothing to do with swag supply. The challenge is the logistics. So what I have learned in the running of a fledgling whiskey business and adjacent club is the logistics involved in, I think you'll all agree, I hope you'll agree, that whenever we do a thing, you don't get let down. Things don't get lost. We don't promise a thing and don't do it. If we say we're going to do a thing, it's done. The trains will run on time. It'll happen. We only release a thing or do a thing or announce a thing or launch a thing when we know we can do it. And when I say no, we can do it, I mean, not only is there a supplier in place, that supplier has been tested. That supplier has been tested another time. That supplier has been tested a third time. All aspects of the e-commerce works all the way along. Everyone gets the right notifications. The flow from the user journey on the website means it's not confusing, that there's a shop that sells swag, there's a shop that sells whiskey, they come from different places, you got to place different orders, and that the quality, of course, is there for you, that the supply is there for you, and that we don't tie up any working capital more than we can use to survive the club and fund whiskey club activities in stock that will never be used, or in high costs for print on demand and things like that. So it is a thing I've dove into a lot and have a lot of work done on it. We just need the right things. I don't think it's worth us doing anything half-assed. As Ron Swanson would say, we should whole-ass everything we're going to do. And I'd like to whole-ass the swag. So when that happens, we'll have stuff that's different to everybody else, and we'll have things that are unique, and things that are different, and things that are elevated, and things that are good. But until then, we're not half-assing anything. We're just going to whole-ass the whole thing. Do it right or don't do it at all. Kristen, we're going to bar you from this chat for any more offers of work. I mean, we can only receive 47 resumes from you. You know, we're going to have to put the ban hammer down. We almost kicked Paul Costello out of the Shebeen last week for cursing. Ended up Lauren being the one who probably needed to be kicked out. But Kristen's on a warning, a timeout. And we will do this, Kristen. There'll be no more begging for jobs in our chat, or we'll start charging you for job snooping. Lauren says I didn't swear. Kristen, I messaged you and told you how to get jobs with all your favorite whiskey brands in Ireland, and I haven't seen you take action on any of it. So you know how to get jobs. Chancer, we have no jobs. We've barely jobs for ourselves. Lauren needs to get her money back. An internship, says Scott. I'm not managing interns here now at all. It's hard enough managing my own ability to stay functional. Kristen, you'll have to go back through your messages. You'll find, I probably told you sitting down in Doolin after the whiskey bus. I said, here's how you do it. Here's how you go about getting the jobs in Ireland. So important was it to you that you've forgotten all of it? Oh yes, I forgot that. Yeah, Kristen, I mean your whole presence on the whiskey bus is in jeopardy here. If 40 people will be getting pitches for your employment. Brian says the sisters who taught Lauren in primary school are very disappointed. You got through it. We didn't get any bans from YouTube anyway. We managed to get through the night. This peated Connemara, I actually really enjoy it. Very, very light and peat. White pepper spice, lemon balm, lemon zest, biscuity, malty character. Distillers have told me that peated whiskies work best at young ages. Now there's a 21-year-old or 22-year-old, is it, Connemara as well? But youthful spirit and the flavor profile and the fruitiness of the youthful spirit can actually work really well with with when it's got a peated malt in it. The combination of a bourbon barrel, for example, 3 or 4 years in a bourbon barrel, a youthful spirit made with a malted peat malted barley can be a wonderful combination. Like you take the likes of Bill Phil, young peated whiskey. Whereas this is a 12-year-old whiskey, and I feel like it's lost perhaps some of that smokiness, but it's gained. I think this is all bourbon barrel age, isn't it? It's definitely gained kind of vanilla, lemony notes. All right. I like it. Any karaoke machines that are smuggled out on the bus or smuggled onto the bus will be smuggled back out the back door very quickly at high speeds. The peat is severely diminished at old ages, says Mark. Yeah. I must go back and try the 22-year-old when I get a drop of it. I don't have any here, but the 12 really, actually really like this. Really like it. Very different to our short cross whiskey. Very different. What else do we need to talk about? Anything else? Working on a Waterford Distillery quarterly tasting for us. Working on new packaging for our quarterly tasting kits. Working on bottling, new bottles for our quarterly tasting kits. Lots of those things in the works at the moment to try and bring a kind of a uniform high-end solution for our tasting kits every quarter. Working on a annual subscription to Stories and Sips. Working on an upgrade option for you to go from quarterly or from monthly to annually for, we'll send you some whiskey kind of thing. Working on that. Working on that hopefully in the next month or so, I'll be able to release those details, and maybe we'll do a kind of a membership drive to get more folks in. I'm also working on some celebrations for our 10,000 members in our Irish Whiskey Fans of America group and what that looks like. We're working on our 2 next bottlings really at the moment. Dunville's hopefully soon, Killowen very quickly after that, maybe even 2 stacks. We're staying north of the wall, north of the border there for the next 3 whiskies, maybe, who knows. And we've got other discussions going on as well in different parts of Ireland. So those things we're working on at the moment. I've also got a great interview with Brian Nation from when he was in Cork last week that we did with him and Patrick O'Shaughnessy, the founder of O'Shaughnessy Distilling. The 2 of them were in Cork, and I sat down with them for 20-25 minutes in the Shelburne bar. We had a great chat on video. Some of you will remember about 2 years ago, we had them both on our lock-in live stream on YouTube on Stories and Sips when they just opened the distillery. It was brand new, and Brian wanted to sing a song. He jumped out of his seat to sing a song, and Patrick was surprised at this. And as soon as Patrick came into the Shelburne, he said, "Barry, I have a song for you this week, and I want to sing it. I want to sing a song for you. Brian got a song last time. I said, Patrick, it's all yours. Sing a song." So I've got a great video of Patrick singing, and I'll share it out with you this week. I'll edit that video up and put it out. Hopefully tomorrow or Tuesday, I'll be able to get that video out to you. We've also got a great interview with Dahi O'Connell from WD O'Connell Whiskey Merchants. Dahi has chatted with Mark McLaughlin, one of our content creators and co-hosts, about sourcing casks and how he went from starting a whiskey company, a whiskey bonding and whiskey merchant company, to the first ever cask he bought and how he sources casks and looks for casks. I think it's a really fascinating interview behind the scenes. So it's one of our behind the scenes journey stories that we'll share this week as well. So those 2 big videos will come out, Brian Nation and WD O'Connell founder Dahi O'Connell. So those are big interviews. Shorty's here now. Shorty's there. See the way it focuses on him? Then focuses on me. Focuses on him. But last week, it was focusing on him. He was so good. It was picking him up. The drawing was so good. Right. Sinead, that's it. I'm going to wrap up, folks. Thank you for joining the Shebeen this week. As always, all I ask that you click subscribe, and if you did enjoy it, maybe share it in one of your Facebook groups, share it with your friends, share this video. It's available all the time on our YouTube channel. We have 165 videos on our YouTube channel, folks. They don't cost you a penny if you're not a member of our club. Or if you are a member and you want more content, you can go back 4 years and find 165 videos there that we've done, thousands of hours of crack, of chat. We'll in the next year or 2, we'll go through all those videos and we'll chop them up into 2 minutes of this and 5 minutes of that and 10 minutes of that, and we'll dice them all up and send them out as well for more sharing. But they're all there. Click the subscribe button, click on the like button. That's all we ask. And if you have any questions for us at any time or any questions about Irish whiskey, I'd love to try and answer them for you. I want more people to fall in love with Irish whiskey, and I want them to do that. I want you to do that through the people and the places of the pours. So I want you to connect with the stories and hopefully enjoy the whiskey at the same time. That's my goal. And I want to bring more of these small and unheard of distilleries and brands to you in addition to the ones that you're already familiar with. So that's my goal. And with your help, we'll do that, and we'll help grow the Irish whiskey industry together. And it's a wonderful industry to be part of. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. And we'll see you all in our Facebook community over the course of the next week. And I'll talk to you again next Sunday. So as always, Sláinte, keep drinking something Irish. Thanks, everybody.